I'm looking at Psalm 20, and I want to just read some of it. It says, "May the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and grant you support from Zion. May he remember all your sacrifices and accept your burnt offerings. May he give you the desire of your heart to make all your plans succeed. We will shout for joy when you are victorious. We will lift up our banners in the name of our God. May the Lord grant all your requests." And this is a Psalm of David, a really interesting psalm about the whole thing of requesting, about God's protection. It talks about God's particular help coming. It talks about God remembering the sacrifices and offerings, the obedience. And it talks about this whole thing of people just rejoicing when victory comes, and kind of spurring, cheering someone on. And a good person has good desires in their heart, a person who's following the Lord. But we often find that life is complex, and that we often feel that justice isn't always done, and good things don't always happen to good people, and good things seem to sometimes happen to bad people. And it's a plea, a cry, a prayer for God to enter into that place where there's distress. It's a plea and it's a prayer for God to protect. It's a cry from the heart to say, Lord, come into this situation and be on our side in this, and fight for what's right, Lord. Fight for the justice of this cause. It's a psalm about dependence, saying that in verse 7, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They are brought to their knees and fall, but we rise up and stand firm. O Lord, save the King. Answer us when we call. Even in the context of perhaps doing the right thing and being a representative of God in battle, and all those different things which it appears that David was, certainly a considerable amount of the time, we're also aware that somehow there's this dependence, there's this need to cry out. Sometimes, we feel justified in that, but what we also learn very much from other Psalms too, and from the Bible as a whole, that we don't always fit into the place of deserving mercy and grace. And Psalm 51 talks about that, when David had fallen, and he recognizes, his brokenness before God, really. Not every day was a great success. Not every day was a day that it felt fair to ask God for mercy and favour and answers, and God to be on his side, as it were. And I was thinking today about the whole issue about justice, and justice alongside mercy. Mercy is what we don't really deserve, and justice is getting what we do. But the world is full of injustice. Sometimes also people seek justice. They seek recourse. Sometimes we have a legal system that enables that to happen, and in varying ways people feel that they need to get justice about something. But I think it's very complicated. I think there are times when clearly justice needs to be seen to be done. We need the right systems. We need things to be put right. We need to see justice through God's eyes as well, about those things that quickly get missed, those people who have actually more power than those who don't sometimes. And it's not always evident. We might feel that we're on the weaker side, and then suddenly we find that we're also an oppressor in some form or other. we assume certain people have power, and perhaps they don't. We might assume also that our sense of justice getting done will resolve things, and yet so often they don't deeply resolve everything. People are still wrestling with all sorts of other things, guilt and shame and the trauma and all manner of outcomes. Resolution isn't always so quick to find. So we see that, there's an extent where seeing justice done matters, but I honestly think that very often in that process too, frequently we see injustice done. We even more so, perhaps we look to the courts to solve a problem, and yet those with more money, sometimes their case wins more easily, or there's not always a decision that's made that's right. We look for justice being done, and someone gets a conviction for something awful that's happened, and yet what do we do with that person? And then there's a whole issue of people who are abused or abusers, and many abusers are people who have experienced abuse. So it's not always as simplistic as there's the evil people here and the good people there. Life isn't frequently quite that clear cut. We might feel that it is, but I also believe that God's power is redeeming. And it's quite easy. I often see myself perhaps very, very quick to quickly assess someone as being on the wrong side. Quickly see someone in a certain light, perhaps. See the bad stuff they're doing. Kind of label them very much, and yet I don't know necessarily their story. And that's not to justify or support evil things, but I frequently don't know all the details about the case either. I don't know the whole deal from start to finish. God's redemptive plan is to redeem people, turn their lives around. They may have to live out the consequences of actions, but it's never that someone's completely written off. There's always a chance for God to transform them. And by that I don't mean somehow we just have to kind of wink at what's wrong and just say, well, it doesn't really matter. Of course it matters. It matters deeply. There are many things are affected by things that happen. But I often feel that we have to depend on God's mercy. We have to put ourselves not as the righteous, not as the virtuous, not as the perfect, but actually as the people in need of God's mercy, in need of his transformation. That we, the people who might be asking, and one day we might feel like we've got all the boxes ticked, we're on the right side of everything. But I'm not sure that it's always that clear cut every day. I was upset and angry about an article that appeared in the paper that was very critical, very, very harsh, and maybe rightly, maybe not rightly. And of course, everybody jumped on the bandwagon and said, this person has lied, these people are evil, they're terrible, I told you so. But I'm not convinced it was quite that clear cut. And I wondered, feeling angry about it really, but I wondered at the end of the day, how many of the people who were quick to point the finger had ever lied themselves? What about the child who's grown up in a family, they've gone to ISIS, a young child has grown up, being used, I saw something today, used in a video to support terrorism. And yet, are they innocent? Are they not? What happens if they grow up and become a terrorist? And yet that's what they've grown up in, knowing those things, being aware, being exposed to all that stuff. It's complicated. God has a heart to redeem, transform people, and very often we realize that we are as much a product of stuff that's happened and where that's led us and formed us and what we've become in this broken, fallen world. And as much as suddenly become some awful, evil person, I don't think life is frequently like that, to be really honest. If it was that simplistic, it would be so much easier, but I can't really see that as being the case. And so we have to depend on God. We have to cry out to him. Maybe it's a good moment to do that. Father, I pray as we cry out to you for this in our times of distress. When we look to you, Lord, on a good day when we feel we've done all the right things, and on a bad day when we know we don't deserve mercy, Lord, and when it feels we made good plans and we're really following the desires of your heart, wonderful. The days that actually our heart is way more complicated, maybe not as full of integrity, maybe self-reliant, maybe terribly vulnerable, maybe not in a great place at all. In all those times, Lord, we look to you and we recognize actually that we need your mercy. We want to be submitted to you, but Lord, we need your mercy. I pray that we would call on you in that place of humility, in the time of distress, when we feel we're on the right side, and maybe in the times when we know we're probably definitely not on the right side of things. Lord, help us to trust you and seek you. Help us to depend on you. Lord, give us more grace. Help us also to understand what mercy is. We want to see justice, but we want to see your mercy, your redemptive power come in and transform people, transform us, and start with me.